To understand how the Tudors came to rule England, we must first look at the years leading up to their reign. 32 years before Henry VII took the throne, the country was plunged into decades of fighting and civil war, known as the War of the Roses. The war was fought between two rival branches of the Plantagenet line for control of the throne. But why was it called the War of the Roses? The two different branches, House of Lancaster and House of York, were represented by a rose, red for Lancaster and white for York. In 1455, the king, Henry VI, was mentally unwell, and people lost faith in his ability to successfully lead the kingdom. His cousin Richard of York captured him and made himself Lord Protector. This gave Richard all the power of king. Fights over control of the throne plagued the following years. After Richard of York was killed at the Battle of Wakefield, his son Edward inherited his father's claim to the throne, and after fierce fighting, Edward was crowned king in 1461. Edward IV's reign was not an easy one, and faced constant challenges to the throne from the supporters of Henry VI, as well as from his own brother and cousin. There were periods he lost control of the throne and then regained it. Henry VI died under suspicious circumstances while in custody of Edward IV, and Edward had his own brother George or Clarence executed for treason by drowning him in a barrel of wine. Edward had married Elizabeth Woodville in 1464. This had enraged some of Edward's previous supporters as her family and dead husband had been proud Lancastrians and was seen as the enemy. In total, they had 14 children together, including 2 boys, Edward and Richard. Richard III was the younger brother of Edward IV. After the death of his brother, Richard stole the throne from his nephew Edward V. Richard III, also known as the Duke of Gloucester, was the last Yorkist king of England. Richard III is often portrayed as being the most wicked and evil of kings. William Shakespeare created a whole play based upon Richard's treachery. It's important to remember that this play was written years after Richard's death, and Shakespeare used it to gain favour with the Tudors, as it provided support for their claim to the throne. However, Richard had been loyal to his brother Edward IV, going into exile with him while their other brother George tried to usurp him. He fought in many battles for his brother and may have been involved in the murder of Henry VI. After the death of Edward IV, Richard first seized Prince Edward V. Prince Edward's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, escaped into sanctuary, with her younger son, also named Richard. Richard III later convinced Elizabeth to also entrust him with Prince Richard and placed them in the Tower of London, supposedly for their own protection. Richard was first named Lord Protector. He then had his brother's children claimed illegitimate and was crowned himself king on July 6, 1483. The tyrannous and bloody deed is done. The fate of the princes in the Tower is one of the biggest mysteries of Britain's history. In 1483, the 2 princes, 12-year-old Edward and 9-year-old Richard, who had been staying in the Tower, disappeared. Centuries later, nobody knows the truth of what happened to the 2 boys, although their fates have been debated by many historians. What is known for a fact is that they were last seen in the summer of 1483, playing in the grounds of the Tower of London. Some believe their own uncle, Richard III, had them murdered and their bodies hidden so as to prevent any chance of the princes staking their own claim to the throne. Richard III's own brother, King Edward IV, had had their other brother killed after he himself had tried to snatch the throne. They were a family thirsty for power and not unwilling to betray those closest to them to get it. However, the evidence linking Richard III directly to their deaths is circumstantial, and some argue that he may have been unfairly vilified by Tudor propaganda. Others suspect Margaret Beaufort, Henry VII's mother, who may have had the boys murdered on her orders so that she could turn the country against Richard and make it easier for her son to claim the throne. Or could Henry VII himself have been responsible? He didn't announce the murders of the princes until a year after he took the throne. Is it possible that they were still alive and well while Richard was fighting Henry, and that Henry had them killed to minimise any threats against his own claim? Or possibly they weren't murdered at all? Historian Philippa Lanley, who was responsible for the discovery of Richard I's body, has investigated whether they actually quietly went to live in the country on the promise they wouldn't try and contest the throne. In 1502, when under sentence to death for treason, Sir James Tyrrell confessed the murder of the boys. But can we trust this confession if there is a chance it was made under torture? In 1642, 2 small skeletons were found buried underneath the base of a stone staircase in the White Tower in the Tower of London when renovations were being made. Could these be the bones of the lost princes? King Charles II believed them to be, and had them buried in an urn in Westminster Abbey, but due to limited evidence, their identities have never been conclusively proven. The mystery surrounding the fate of the princes in the tower has captured the imagination of many, and their story continues to be a subject of fascination and speculation. While the truth may never be fully known, their disappearance remains one of the enduring mysteries in English history. Richard I's reign was short, lasting only 2 years. He faced many challenges during his time as king, including conflicts with other noble families who wanted power. And then entered Henry Tudor. The Battle of Bosworth. In 1485, Henry Tudor crossed the English Channel with 2,000 men and landed in Wales. By the time they had reached the Welsh-English border, the number of the massed Lancastrian army had more than doubled in size. But this appeared as no match for Richard I's royal army, which numbered 10,000 men. The forces gathered to fight on August 22, 1485. Richard I's Yorkist army deployed on Ambion Hill, while Henry Tudor's Lancastrian forces positioned themselves in a nearby marshy ground. Prior to the main battle, there were several skirmishes between the two armies. Richard I's cavalry attempted to flank Henry Tudor's forces, but they were repelled by the Lancastrian archers. For any chance of winning, Henry needed the support of his stepfather, Lord Stanley's private army. However, as the armies took their places on the battlefield near Bosworth, Lord Stanley commanded his troops to remain waiting on the hilltop before deciding which side he was going to take. Richard III, known for his prowess in battle, thought he had the advantage, and led a charge directly at Henry Tudor, targeting his position, seeking to end the battle swiftly. In doing so, Richard separated himself from his main forces. Lord Stanley made his decision. He charged into battle on the side of his stepson. Richard's horse became trapped in the boggy field, and Richard continued fighting on foot. He fought valiantly, refusing to retreat or surrender. He became overwhelmed and was killed. His Yorkist army saw his fate and fled the battlefield. Henry Tudor was brought Richard's crown and declared king on the nearby Crown Hill. Richard's body was rumoured to have been stripped naked and stabbed as it was paraded through the battlefield. It then disappeared for hundreds of years and had been rumoured to be thrown into a river. Then, in 2012, an archaeological dig was led in a car park in Leicester. Watch the documentary Richard III, the King in the Car Park to find out more. The battle is often seen as a turning point in English history. It marked the beginning of the Tudor era, which brought stability and significant changes in England. Richard III is a historical figure who was once the King of England. While there are different opinions about him, it's important to study history and learn from different perspectives to get a better understanding of who he was and what he did. Many historians debate his character and actions, with some viewing him as a ruthless and power-hungry villain, while others argue that he was a capable ruler facing difficult circumstances. This is why it's important to look at multiple sources of evidence, as some historical accounts can be biased towards one idea and ignore other facts or events which contradict it. You're going to hold a murder mystery investigation. Cut out our murder mystery sheets to use as props, and then you could either act the role as the suspects and interview each other, or run a police investigation. Who do you think is the real culprit of the missing princes in the tower?